October 1945. The first frost clings to the barbed wire at Camp Atlanta, Georgia, where the morning mist rises from the red clay like breath from a sleeping giant. Inside Hut 17, a young German woman named Ilse Becker, once a Flakhelferin on the rooftops of Berlin, stands barefoot on the cold pine floorboards, clutching a bundle of army gray wool issued the night before. The air smells of pine disinfectant and fresh coffee drifting from the American guardhouse. A wax sergeant with rolled sleeves places a pair of gleaming aluminum knitting needles into Ilse's calloused hands and says simply, "Make something warm." For the first time in 6 years, no one is shouting orders. Only the soft click of needles begins, hesitant, then steady, like a heartbeat remembering peace. This small moment in a Georgia autumn would seem trivial against the thunder of collapsing empires, yet it pierced the armor of a generation raised under the iron doctrines of National Socialism. By the autumn of 1945, more than 400,000 German prisoners of war were held on American soil. Among them, roughly 4,000 women, auxiliaries of the Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe signal personnel, nurses and searchlight operators captured in France, Italy, and finally in the ruins of the Reich itself. American policy, shaped by the Geneva Convention and a deliberate program of democratic re-education, forbade forced labor for women and instead offered voluntary classes in everything from English conversation to embroidery and knitting. What the captives expected was brutality, starvation, perhaps the revenge they had been told was coming. What they found were heated barracks, 3 full meals a day, Red Cross parcels, and, in hundreds of camps from Texas to Massachusetts, knitting circles supervised by smiling American women who handed out patterns for baby booties and argyle socks as casually as ammunition had once been distributed. The contrast struck like a physical blow. In the last winter of the war, German civilians in Berlin queued for hours for a single turnip. Here, in Camp Hearn, Texas, a former Luftwaffe telephonist named Gertrude Mueller wrote in her diary on 12 November 1945, "Today we received real coffee, white bread, and wool in 5 colors. I cried into the skein because I remembered my little brother freezing in Stalingrad." Another prisoner, captured near Aachen, recalled being marched into Camp Rust in Louisiana, expecting chains, and instead being handed a Hershey bar and a pamphlet titled, "What is Democracy?" The chocolate melted on tongues that had forgotten sweetness. The pamphlet was read aloud in the barracks by candlelight, argued over, and finally folded into knitted scarves as bookmarks. Official records confirm the abundance. Between June 1943 and June 1946, the United States Army issued over 1.7 million Red Cross knitting kits to German prisoners, both men and women. Yarn consumption alone reached 280 tons, enough to circle the equator twice if laid end to end. Quartermaster reports list skeins of scarlet, forest green, and snow-white wool moving through the same supply lines that once fed Patton's Third Army. In Camp Aliceville, Alabama, the weekly canteen sold 40-pound bales of mill ends for 10 cents a pound, paid for with scrip earned by picking cotton or peeling potatoes, work that was entirely voluntary for the women. Photographs from the National Archives show rows of German women in patched Wehrmacht skirts, heads bent over needles, producing layettes for American war orphans and mittens for the coming winter. One image, dated 3 December 1945, captures a former SS auxiliary carefully counting stitches while a Black American corporal refills her coffee cup without ceremony, an everyday act that contradicted 12 years of racial ideology more powerfully than any lecture. The clicking of those needles became the recurring sound of revelation. Night after night, it echoed through the barracks, soft, persistent, unhurried, like rain on a tin roof after drought. To women who had saluted portraits of the Führer and believed in blood in soil, the steady rhythm spoke of something alien and intoxicating, time that belonged to no one but themselves. A 19-year-old signal auxiliary from Hamburg wrote to her mother in a letter cleared by censors, "Here they let us choose the color of the wool and the pattern of the sweater. Choice, Mutti. I had forgotten such a thing existed." Another prisoner, captured at Cherbourg, confessed in a secret diary later discovered by American historians. When I knit a row without mistakes, I feel as though I'm repairing something inside my soul that the party tore open. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ideology cracked. Re-education lectures were compulsory, but knitting classes were not. Yet attendance approached 100%. The voluntary act of creating something beautiful and useful with American wool undermined the myth of the brutal, decadent plutocracy. In the spring of 1946, when repatriation ships began departing New York Harbor, many women carried hand-knitted sweaters in their meager luggage. Some hid forbidden diaries inside balls of leftover wool. One woman, interviewed decades later by German television, still possessed the first scarf she ever finished in captivity. Soft Shetland wool in the colors of the American flag, stripes worked without conscious irony, because the wool just came that way. By the time the last female POW stepped aboard the SS Marine Perch in June 1946, the clicking needles had done more than produce 180,000 garments for civilian relief. They had woven a subtle, undeniable truth into hardened hearts that a nation capable of feeding, clothing, and teaching its enemies in the hour of total victory possessed a strength deeper than any panzer division. The wool itself, abundant, colorful, freely given, became the quiet symbol of a democracy that did not need to scream to be heard. Years later, in the rebuilt streets of a new Termini, elderly women would sometimes pause at shop windows displaying bright skeins of yarn and feel, for just a moment, the ghost of aluminum needles between their fingers. And in that fleeting sensation, they remembered the frost-covered morning in Georgia or Alabama or Virginia when they first understood that freedom is not merely the absence of chains, but the presence of choices so gentle that they can be held in the palm of one hand, one stitch, one row, one life at a time.